I have Nanobot Battle Arena set up for a two-player game. Each player has their hand of 6 cards. We just need to figure out exactly which Nanobot each player is going to be playing. We're going to have a game of the Relics versus the Storm. Once we figure out which side each player is going to be playing, we just need to go ahead and grab our Nanobots. And each player is then ready to go ahead and begin the game. After we've gotten our Nanobots, each player needs to figure out exactly who is going to play first. And to do that, we simply just flip over cards until we get a card that happens to match one of our players, and the first one we flipped over is a Relic, so the Relic player is going to be player number 1 for our 2-player Nanobot duel between the Relics and the Storms. Starting with the Relic player grabs one of their Nanobots, places them on the table, and that begins the game. Now they play one card. They're going to play the Grow card, which is going to allow them to add one Nanobot onto the table in any form, position they want, as long as it's placed orthogonically, connecting to any Nanobots that are currently on the table. That ends the Relic player's turn. They draw their card, back up to a hand of 6 cards, and now we get to start with the Storm player's turn. Storm gets one of their Nanobots, adds it to the table. Now it has to be orthogonically connected to any tile currently on the board. It just cannot be placed in front of one of their enemy's tiles. So we're going to go ahead and place the Nanobot down just like this. And then we're going to go ahead and place a Grow card, a Grow 3 card, which allows us to add 3 Nanobots to the board. Now, normally the rule states you cannot place a Nanobot in front of another one's unless it's also going in front of your Nanobots. So we're not breaking any rules at all here. We place 1, 2, and finally we place 3 Nanobots on the board, and now we have a chain of 4 versus our opponent's chain of 2. We just need to draw one card back up to our hand of 6. That ends the turn for the Storm player. We're now back to the Relic player's turn. The Relic player sees that Storm is obviously trying to line up a Surge to make me lose a whole bunch of my Relics and return to my cache here, so the Relic player is going to be pretty smart about their future plays now and make sure they're not going to fall for any traps like that. They're going to play one of their Nanobots on the table, then they're going to go ahead and play a Petrify card. Now Petrify here only has 2 charges, but since we are the Relic, we get 1 extra charge, which is going to allow us to turn 3 of our Nanobots to their Petrified side or their Shielded side, whatever helps you remember the rules a little bit better. I prefer to use the term shield because it's pretty much basically what it is you're shielded from any damage from any cards after that point. We have now protected 3 of our Nanobots. We now have a chain of 3, and it's a safe chain of 3 unless the Storm player plays a Petrify card to unpetrify our Nanobots. For the Storm player's turn, they're going to add 1 Nanobot to their chain, and they're going to put it out there in such a way that now they have a chain of exactly 5 Nanobots, forming a solid chain of 5. And then they're going to make the Relic player's life a little more difficult by playing a Petrify on them. Although it's a charge 3, since we're playing against the Relic who has an affinity for Petrify, that means it's going to lose 1 charge. So instead of getting 3 charges against the Relic player, we're only going to get 2 charges. So we're going to take 2 of their Nanobots, and they're going to become unpetrified, which means they can start being used. Or we can start using other abilities to affect them with the other cards we have. We draw a card to get back up to 6 total cards. That's going to end the turn for the Storm player. We now go back to the Relic player. The Relic player places a Nanobot on the board. They now have 4 Nanobots forming a solid chain. And then they're going to play the Pivot card against the Storm player. And they're going to pivot one of their Nanobots away, which means that they can't storm any of these guys because their facing is completely wrong. And then they're going to storm this guy, which is going to break all of their chains. And now the Storm player doesn't have any large chains, and now it looks like the Relic player is now winning with the longest chain of 4 Nanobots. We draw a card, back up to a total of 6 cards in our hand, and now we're back to the Storm player's turn. Storm player is going to place 1 Nanobot down on the table, and they're going to place the Nanobots so they're facing directly up, pointing at these 2 Relics Nanobots, and then they're going to go ahead and use the Surge ability. Now since Surge happens to be their color, their affinity, it's actually going to work for 2 charges versus the Relic player, and these 2 Relics are completely not petrified, so they're perfectly willing to be bombarded by our Surge power. The Surge ability is going to allow us to return up to 2 Nanobots in our facing, and since our facing happens to be this way, we're going to return these 2 Nanobots to the Relic player's cache. Now Surge is one of the rare cards that when it's used, it sends the Nanobots back to the cache as opposed to the graveyard, such as what Burn does. Burn sends them to the graveyard, Storm sends them back to the owner's cache. That ends the Storm player's turn. We're now back to the Relic player's turn after we draw a card to bring our hand back up to 6 total cards. And before I continue, I neglected to draw a card for the Relic player at the end of their turn, so I'll go ahead and grab that card right now. And then we'll go ahead and continue with the relic player's turn. We're going to go ahead and place a nanobot down on the table. Now we can place it here safely, even though we're placing it in front of another player's nanobot, because we're also placing it in front of one of our nanobots. And then we're going to go ahead and use the infect card, and we're going to go ahead and corrupt two of our opponent's nanobots and turn them into our strain. But the trick is they have to keep the same facing they had before. That's going to be, these two are going to be sent to the graveyard because they're destroyed. We draw another card to bring our hand back up to 6 cards, and that's the end of the relic player's turn. The storm player is going to play one of their nanobots down on the table in a legal position, and then they're going to go ahead and play a card. They're going to play a burn card. Now burn says they have to pick a nanobot that's at the end of a chain, so it can be either the beginning of a chain or the end of a chain. It's up to us, and we're going to go ahead and decide to take out this nanobot right here. Now burn destroys nanobots, so he's sent to the graveyard. That nanobot is destroyed. We played our nanobot, we played our card, we draw a card to get our hand back up to 6 cards. And that's the end of the storm player's turn. We're back to the relic player who needs to figure out what they want to do, because all they have is a chain of 2 versus a chain of 2 from their opponent. They need to figure out a way to get their chains higher and start protecting their nanobots. For the relic player's turn, we're going to take one of our nanobots, place it down, and now we actually have a chain of 4 nanobots thanks to this nice line of nanobots we have here. And now we have an option of 2 things we can do versus a storm player. We can go ahead and burn them and take out 2 of their nanobots right here, since they're each starting or ending a chain, so they both would be valid targets. Or we can go ahead and use a Surge 3 card, but since it's -1, since that's their affinity, we're going to get the same results either way, but at least if we use the burn card, they're going to be destroyed and sent back to the graveyard, whereas if we use a Surge card, they're just going to be returned to that player's stockpile, which is going to allow them to put them back into play. So instead of using a Surge card, we're going to go ahead and keep that Surge card, and we're going to use the burn card and burn these 2 nanobots and destroy them and remove them from the game. Draw a new card, and that is the end of the relic player's turn. We're now back to the storm player. For the storm player, they're going to take one of their nanobots, place it down, making a chain of 2, and then they're going to go ahead and play a card. They're going to play a blink card, and it's going to allow them to move one of their nanobots. It has to keep the same facing, same positioning. They're going to move their nanobot over here, and now they've created a chain of 3 nanobots. They're going to draw another card. That's going to end their turn, and we're now back to the relic player's turn. The relic player for their turn is going to play one of their nanobots. They now have a chain of 5 nanobots. And then they're going to go ahead and play a grow card, which is going to allow them to add 3 more nanobots onto the chain, meaning they have a really large chain. Kind of a bold, gutsy move a little bit at this stage of the game, because we don't know if the storm player is going to be able to counter this or not. But our plan is to set us up for the Surge card. Our grow has been spent. We're going to draw another card, bring our hand back up to 6 cards. We're now back to the storm player's turn. The storm player for their turn is going to play 1 nanobot. They now have a chain of 4 nanobots. Not nearly as large as the chain that the relic player has, but they're working on making a comeback. They're going to use a blink card. Blink one of their nanobots, has to keep the same facing, but now we have a chain of 5 nanobots. Draw a card, and our turn is now over. We're back to the relic player's turn. The relic player is going to play one of their nanobots down, and they're going to face it towards the Surge, or towards the storm player, because they're going to go ahead and play that Surge card we saw earlier. Now remember, since the storm player has an affinity for the Surge cards, it's going to have 1 minus to its charge, so we're only getting a total of 2 charges. That's still going to be enough for us to remove 2 nanobots from the board, and since Surge doesn't actually destroy nanobots, it allows them to go back in that player's pile. That's going to use the Surge card. We're going to draw another card, bring us back up to 6 cards, and that's going to end the turn for the relic player, who has a very large chain and is really looking like they're winning the game so far. So the storm player needs to come up with a really good strategy, because looking at the relic player, we see that they only have 4 tiles left on their cache. Things aren't over for the storm player, though, because they do have a plan. They're going to go ahead and play one of their nanobots down, and then they're going to go ahead and play a Surge card. Now remember, since they have an affinity for Surge, it's going to be +1 to the charge, so we're going to have a total of 3 charges, which means we're going to remove 1, 2, 3 nanobots, which are going to go back into the relic player's turn, which has really broke their chain down. So now they only have chains of 2, which is the best they got, which is going to match us. We played our card, we're going to draw another card, and we're going to start the relic player's turn now. The relic player gets to play 1 nanobot down. They're going to place it down on the table, adding it to the pile. Then they're going to go ahead and play a blink card, which is allow them to move up to 2 nanobots, but they have to keep the same facing. They're going to move one nanobot down to here. And then the second nanobot, they're going to move up here. And now we're back to having a chain of 4 nanobots for the relic player, putting the relic player back in the lead for winning the game if they manage to get through all their nanobots before the storm player can. That ends the relic player's turn. We're now back to the storm player's turn. The storm player wants to slow down the relic player, so they're going to put one of their nanobots out like this. And now normally you can't place a nanobot in front of another player unless it's also in front of one of your nanobots, so it's a perfectly legal play. And we now have managed to block off this chain on the relic player. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to play a freeze card, hoping through some card play we can slow down the relic player. Forgot to draw a card for the relic player. The relic player will now have a hand of 6 cards, and since we played a freeze on him, we randomly pick 2 cards that the relic player will not have access to until the end of their turn. So that means they only have 4 cards to use on their turn when it comes back up. That's the end of the storm player's turn. We're back to the relic player's turn after we draw our card, bring our hand back up to 6 cards again. For our turn, we're going to place one of our nanobots, making a chain. Now our chain is up to 5 nanobots. And then we're going to go ahead and play an infect card, and we're going to infect this nanobot, which destroys that nanobot. And then we're going to put another nanobot out in place of it, completely replacing it, making sure we're keeping the same facing. And now we have a chain of 6 nanobots. Draw another card, and then the 2 cards that were frozen we can now add back to our hand. We're back up to 6 cards in our hand, and it's now back to the storm player's turn. The storm player, for their turn, they're going to add one of their nanobots to the board. They now have a chain of 2 nanobots. And then they're going to play a grow card, which has allowed them to add 2 more nanobots to the board. They're going to play them out in a way that they can manage to block off the relic player, preventing them from making this chain any longer, which is also going to give them a chain of 4, hopefully slowing down the relic player long enough so the storm player can manage to do something that's going to help them win the game. And hopefully we have the cards in our hand. They're going to help us get set up to do that rather quickly as we go back to the relic player's turn, who has a couple different options of what they can do now. The relic player is going to place down. They're going to get another added to their chain, so now their chain is up to a total of 7 nanobots. And then they're going to go ahead and play a card. They're going to play a burn card. They're going to burn this nanobot, and since it's a burn card, it is completely destroyed. Draw a card, add it to our hand, and we're now back to the storm player's turn. We need to figure out what they're going to do very quickly because they're about to lose the game. Looking at the relic, only has 3 left. We only have 3 left, and we are currently holding the smallest chain as the storm player. The storm player, for their turn, they're going to place one of their nanobots out on the table. Again, this is legal, even though we're in front of another nanobot, because we're in front of one of our own nanobots. And then we're going to play a blink card, which will allow us to move this nanobot from here to here. And now the storm player has a chain of 5 nanobots. And all they have to do is figure out a way to slow down the relic player before they can get their last nanobots out. And the game is not quite over for a storm player. Now, since the storm player was clever enough to place their nanobot here, this means the relic player cannot place a nanobot here. So for their turn, they're just going to simply place one of their nanobots right here like that. And then they're going to play a grow card, put their nanobot out, and now they have another nanobot out. And their chain has gone even longer, and they only have 1 nanobot left, which means the game is just about over. Storm needs to figure out a quick way to start breaking this up, or they're going to lose the game very, very quickly. Luckily, our storm player has a plan, and it's going to be a plan that's going to help them quite a bit. They're going to play 1 nanobot out. Their chain is now a chain of 6 nanobots. And then they're going to go ahead and play a surge card, which means these 2 nanobots, since they're in line of sight, are going to be returned to the relic player, completely breaking the chain and making life more difficult for the relic player. We're now back to the relic player's turn. They need to figure out exactly what they want to do to stop what has just been done to their strategy. The relic player plays one of their nanobots down on the table, adding to the chain that was broken earlier. And then they're going to go ahead and play a blink 3 card, and they're going to move a couple nanobots around on the board. They're going to move 1 nanobot. They're going to move a second nanobot. And then that's going to end their turn. They just need to figure out a way to pivot this nanobot around, which luckily they can since we do have a pivot card. That's going to end the turn for our relic player. It's now back to our storm player to again try to figure out a way to break out this long chain that the relic player has seemed to have locked down quite well, especially since we only have 1 card left, I'm sorry, 1 nanobot left, and as soon as we play it, that's going to end the game. For the storm player's turn, they have 1 nanobot left. Now remember, as soon as you play your final nanobot, the game ends immediately. You're not going to get any more cards to play or anything. So you need to place the final nanobot in a way that's going to allow you to make your chain as large as you can, because that's going to instantly end the game. But now we just need to figure out exactly which one of our nanobots has the longest chain, and whoever has the longest chain is going to be the winner of the game. So to figure out the victor, we just need to figure out which one of our players has the longest chain of nanobots. We go to the Storm player and see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Storm has a chain of 7 nanobots, whereas the Relic player has a chain of 3, which is one chain. We have a chain of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then we have 2 single chains, which means the Relic player has a chain of 7. The Storm player has a chain of 7, which means we are tied, so we need to go to the second tiebreaker, which is figuring out which player has the least amount of nanobots left in their cache, which happens to be the Storm player, so the Storm player is going to be the winner of this game. Now, if this was a multiplayer game with 3 or more players, and the people who had the longest chain were also tied for the least amount of nanobots left in their cache, you just simply add up the total amount of charges of all the cards remaining in their hand, and whoever has the highest number of charges on all the cards remaining in their hand is going to be the winner. So we see that we have 3, 4, 5, 6 versus a total of 8 cards. If this case, this was the final tiebreak, the Relic player would win. But since this isn't the case, the fact is the Relic player still had 2 nanobots left over. That means the Relic player loses, the Storm player wins, and that's the end of the game. I hope you enjoyed the sample gameplay of Nanobot Battle Arena. If you like what you saw, stay tuned for my final review of the game.